Going to call the January 10th, 2023 Planning Board meeting to order. I will advise everyone on Zoom that this meeting is being recorded. At this point, I'll take roll call, so when I call your name, would you please indicate that you're present? Jonathan Poor.
Present.
Emil Dahlquist.
Present.
Beth Herr.
Present.
Rick Mitchell.
Present.
Richard Boroff.
Present.
And Marnie Crouch, present. The first item on our agenda is to go into executive session, but I've been informed that Jonathan Whitten, who is assisting the town develop a code for the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary site, is with us via Zoom and wanted to make a few comments. So we will defer going into executive session until we can hear from Mr. Whitten, and following our executive session with Town Council Robin Stein, we will go on to discuss the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary reuse initiative. So with those comments, I invite Mr. Whitten to introduce himself to the Planning Board. I think it's the first opportunity that many of us have to meet you, and I welcome you and all your remarks. Mr. Whitten.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good evening, members of the board. And I hope I'm not the one that is causing things to go out of order, but I certainly appreciate the opportunity to address the board. Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm an attorney in the Commonwealth as well as a planner. And I've had the privilege of working with cities and towns throughout the state and elsewhere in both capacities. I've written a fair bit about planning and development in general, and for the past 35 years have been on the faculty of Tufts University's Department of Urban and Environmental Policy and Planning, where I teach, among other courses, classes in land use planning and local government finance. I also coordinate the dual degree program between the Boston College Law School and Tufts University. I taught at BC Law for 20 years. And just as an aside, for almost 30 years, I served as the consultant to the Planning Board in Manchester by the Sea, right next door. Madam Chair, I've been asked to be of assistance, if needed, to the Planning Board and to the town as it works with Gordon College on the future plans of the campus, a unique and beautiful campus, if I could just add that as well. I think I'm up to speed, Madam Chair, with the prior discussions between the board and the college, at least I believe I am. My understanding is that the college wishes to work with the town to develop a new zoning bylaw, whether it be in the form of an overlay district or revisions to the existing bylaw, and that the college is generally comfortable with the idea of executing a development agreement as it relates to the campus, ensuring additional protections to the town and for the town. In my experience, opportunities such as this don't come along very often. Typically, a landowner of a undeveloped or partially undeveloped project has a project in mind and files with the municipality according to existing regulations. But here, my understanding is the college has approached the town before filing an application with the intent of working with the town cooperatively rather than put the town in a defensive posture. And that's all really good news. The devil is in the details, of course. So the question that I see is how to move forward to develop a zoning bylaw amendment, whether it's an overlay or otherwise, that satisfies the college's financial objectives, but from my perspective, more importantly, protects the town's, consistent with the town's long and short-term planning goals. One approach, Madam Chair, that I found successful is to couple a possible rezoning amendment, the type we're talking about here, to couple that with a development agreement, which is a contract, for lack of better words of referring to it, and it provides the town contractual protections that just aren't available in zoning, that just can't be found in zoning under the Zoning Act. For example, the town could negotiate with the college such that the college willingly contracts away the rights to develop the property in a way that would be unacceptable to the town. The college could willingly contract with the town to make off-site and certainly on-site infrastructure improvements, as well as virtually any other mutually agreeable promises. A development agreement that is coupled with a zoning amendment becomes essentially a belt and suspender approach that, in my experience, works really, really well, especially in Massachusetts, because we are frustrated with the constraints of Chapter 40A. In terms of an amendment to the zoning bylaw, there are also several good options, all with plenty of precedent in Hamilton. An overlay district works well for special projects such as this one. The district is targeted to a parcel of land, and within that district, certain uses, often different from or addition to the underlying district, are permitted. The overlay district then can articulate uses that are permitted by right, meaning the town loses the ability to say no, or targets uses by adjudicative permit, special permit, Chapter 48, Section 9, where the town retains a lot of discretionary control. Uses by right must be approved if they comport with the zoning bylaw and state law. Uses by adjudicative or special permit can be denied or can be approved with conditions. That varying degree of difficulty, kind of on a scale of 1 to 10, use by right being a 1 and a special permit anywhere between a 5 and a 9, a variance is a 10, that degree of difficulty can be reflected in the different portions of the parcel. So, for example, in one portion of the parcel, let's call it Overlay District Section A, there could be a handful of uses that are allowed by right and a couple by special permit. In Overlay District Section B, virtually all the uses could be by right or by special permit, and so on. Site plan review could be required in all portions of the overlay, some portions of the overlay, or for certain types of threshold uses, large projects, large traffic or stormwater generators, for example. Let me stop there, Madam Chair, because I'm not sure how much you wanted to hear from me versus me listen to the board discuss this matter. So I don't want to overstep my welcome. So I think I'll stop there. But let me add this last comment, at least initially. The opportunity that's presented here is really an exciting one because in my experience, in my history, both as a lawyer and as a planner, it's been defending cities and towns against rogue projects. So it's rare, I can count on two hands, the number of times a developer or landowner has come to the town and said, I want to work with you, develop something that's mutually beneficial. So as the outsider here, this is a really exciting opportunity. But I don't want to just keep yammering on, Madam Chair. So let me stop there and see if I can be responsive to questions that the board might have.
Well, I will just make this statement. The other day, I transmitted to members of the board, and I think you may have received it, a memorandum in which I compared the Willow Street overlay district to the Village Center overlay district, the model code that has been promulgated by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and that it's part of their smart growth toolkit. And I compared those two overlay districts. And obviously, each of those overlay districts has aspects of them, provisions that are, I think, very much worth considering, and then maybe some provisions that might not be as applicable. But I agree with you wholeheartedly that the opportunity is fantastic, and the site presents an extraordinary opportunity for development that could, I think, really contribute to the character of the town, the revenue of the town, and also afford the seminary an opportunity to get the maximum benefit for whatever portions of the site they sell. So I don't know if you had an opportunity to review that and would comment on how those two overlay districts might work, and also whether there are others that we should study. Because it's my understanding that you are going to take the first crack at actually developing a code, but if that is not the case, I think that we should know that this evening. But those are the two we've looked at. Obviously, there's others. There's some model codes that are used down on Cape Cod and elsewhere. So can I turn that back to you with those many questions that I ask you?
Yes, and thank you, Madam Chair. No, and I did read your memorandum, and I did understand, I think, exactly what you were saying, and I have reviewed the zoning bylaw. And let me just go further. Yes, I have been asked by the town manager, and I would assume by the planning board, to assist, help draft the bylaw, and I'm happy to take a first stab at it to give the board something to react to. Let me say this about both your memo, Madam Chair, and the kind of the overlay approach in general. Overlays work really, really well. They've been around for a long time. We've used them to protect resources, natural resources. We've used them to protect structures. We've used them to protect large parcels of land like this one. The beauty of an overlay district is it isn't hung up with kind of the rigidity of zoning. It creates flexibility within zoning, which is essentially not a flexible tool. So within the overlay district, much like the ones you referred to, Madam Chair, but also just in general, we can create, the town can create, town meeting can adopt special subsections within the overlay. So for example, on the parcel itself, some of the structures that the board and town meeting might want to preserve and have rehabbed into some other use. That could be a special subsection within the overlay, within a subsection. So the overlay allows us to avoid kind of historic claims of spot zoning. The overlay allows the board to focus on developed areas that can be more open to the free market versus those that should be more heavily regulated. It allows the board and the town to work with the college on what areas of the site can be perpetually protected. And that's the belt and suspenders that I was referring to earlier. So there's really an awful lot of opportunities. I would not say that there is a form of the overlay that is better than any other. There is no wrong form here. We're creating an overlay on top of an underlying district, and we can allow, if the town meeting approves this, allow the underlying uses to be chosen by the applicant and the overlying district, or only the overlying district. More often than not, overlay districts are more restrictive than the underlying district, but I've written the reverse. So it's really kind of a blank slate here, and what an opportunity as a planner and a planning board to look at a parcel of land, an interested and willing partner with the college, and lay out the future history of this parcel. I think, too, the importance of the development agreements really got to come to play here. We all know, everybody on the board knows, the problem of 48 Section 6, the ability of pre-existing non-conforming structures and uses to forever keep changing. And one thing that the development agreement does for a developed site like this one, it allows the town to negotiate restrictions that would otherwise not be in place because of 48 Section 6. So 5 years from now, if the parties reach terms, 5 years from now, the board and the town would not be faced with a whole bunch of applications to expand, alter, or change the chapel or one of the classrooms or one of the dormitory buildings. It's an opportunity to kind of tie everything up in one basket. So again, Madam Chair, I could just keep yammering. I don't want to do that. I would say that the overlay is the way to go, but there is no wrong answer as to how it's framed.
Well, that sounds fabulous, and I will just say that after we return from our executive session, we have some large maps of the site, and the planning board is going to be discussing what aspects, what site characteristics are really worth protecting, and where different types of development may occur. So I think that might provide some guidance with respect to how this overlay district is ultimately crafted. And so with respect to the development agreement, my understanding then would be that that development agreement would inform the overlay district, but it also would be recorded with the Registry of Deeds, so that our town officials 20 years from now or 30 years from now would be on notice that it existed. Am I correct in that?
You are. Most of the time, the contract isn't recorded at the registry, but it certainly could be. So the parties can agree that the document is a recordable instrument. Absolutely. Whatever plans are approved in conjunction with the zoning change can also reflect the development agreement. So there's a lot of ways to ensure that 5 years, 25 years from now, we don't all forget about it. That's absolutely right. One of the recipes of a development agreement that to me is the most successful, if the college is willing to do it, is to actually have for example, a conservation restriction that's recorded at the registry. So there's no doubt about it. So the contract, the development agreement, can also require, if the parties agree, to have subsequent restrictions. And that could be in the form of an affordable housing restriction, can be in the form of a conservation restriction. So there's a lot of ways to ensure the perpetuality of the deal that the town is contemplating making with the college. And the two work hand in glove. One needs the other, but both, in my opinion, are necessary. A rezoning change alone will last only as long as town meeting will tolerate it and can change its mind in the future. So the development agreement really binds both parties for the long-term development of this parcel. And that's an exciting opportunity.
How far along are the negotiations with respect to this development agreement? Do you have an initial draft, or are you still hammering out some last-minute details?
So I might be the worst person to respond to that. I can tell you what I know. Some of it might be better executive session material. I'm not quite sure. I don't want to step on Joe's toes, but I know the conversations are ongoing. There's no draft that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, and if you don't mind, I will open it up to any questions that the other board members may have for you.
Good evening, Jonathan. My name's Emil Dahlquist. I've met you before. And I have a question just to clarify on the overlay district, mandatory versus optional. Are you saying that the developers agreement would be having an optional underlying district exist, or would the mandatory be the one to take over and supplant the current underlying zone?
So can I just ask you to clarify the question? So are you referring to the development agreement in terms of the restrictions or the overlay?
Your reference to the overlay district, there are two options in the overlay, mandatory or optional. The optional one says that the developer can use either the underlying or the overlay. The mandatory is, once that code is adopted, the overlay supplants the underlying, so that no longer exists.
Could I just interject, because the question really comes down to whether the underlying district's permission, for example, to construct single-family houses could be prohibited.
It can be. So I'm going to answer the question, the prior question, kind of as a broad answer, which is there's no rule as to which trumps the other than the historic use of overlay districts has been to make it more restrictive because it was designed for natural resource protection. Wetlands, watersheds, groundwater protection districts that didn't follow right angles, kind of traditional zoning boundaries. Having said that, we can also see the reverse, where we have a parcel that might be better off used commercially or industrially, and the underlying district is residential only. So we create an overlay district that is less restrictive. It could be that this one is a little bit of both. You could allow some of the underlying district provisions to be used, or you could prohibit all the underlying districts. So that is one of the really kind of devil in the details issues, which is if the underlying district is not what the board and town meeting wants relative to the future of this parcel, then the overlying district would subsume and control. There would be no allowable underlying uses. Everything would be dictated in the overlay district. The only rule here is there must be at least one use by right. We cannot allow or require all uses to obtain a special permit. And that would also include the provision of site plan review. So the relationship between the overlying district and the underlying district is really up to the board, up to the town. Generally, the underlying district is superseded by the overlay, but that is, there's flexibility there. So if I could just add one more piece, let's say the campus is divided into 3 sections, A, B, and C. The underlying district could be applicable in A, but not in B and C, or any combination of the above.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I have a quick question that might be a little premature, but given that some of this is easier to put in a map or a diagram than in words, where would that map belong? Would it belong with, let's say the town chose to do an overlay district, does that map belong with the overlay district, or does it belong with the development agreement?
Yeah, great question. Probably the former, but the latter will reference it. So in order to have an overlay district, the zoning map has to be amended to reference that district. And that can be done at the same time. Town meeting is going to be asked to adopt a zoning bylaw overlay district and to adopt a map change to reflect that district.
I guess my question is a little different from that. Let's say that this is a little bit more nuanced and needs to be more granular than the town zoning map sort of level of detail. And so it's in a sense a separate map, an ancillary map, a map that is apart from the town's standard zoning map. If that were the case, where would that document live? How would it be, how would it be referenced and integrated?
Yeah, again, great question, and I do understand it would be in the zoning map. So the development agreement is contractual. It's language that's going to bind the 2 parties, and it's going to be related only to a particular project or a potential project. The zoning overlay is going to run with the land for as long as town meeting lets it run with the land. It can be granular. It can be very, very detailed if we have that information by the time we get to town meeting. But in any case, the change to the map will have to be referenced in zoning. So that kind of as a period after that sentence. The new paragraph is the development agreement can also reference the map, and that can be binding contractually. So my guess is the town's going to want to do both here. But what I don't know, and what I suspect none of us really know, is the granularity, because we don't have a particular project as yet. And until we have that granularity, knowing literally where the driveways and parking areas are going to go for the associated uses, it's going to be really hard, I think, to petition the town meeting that kind of detailed overlay district map. So that's the part we don't know. And I'm not concerned about it, because if we don't have the granularity by the time we have town meeting, then we can pick up that detail as part of the development agreement.
Thank you.
I have a question about what he just said. I thought his question regarded the physical location of the map. And I would assume that physical location is always going to be somewhere in Town Hall. Is that correct?
Yeah, the town clerk is the keeper of all things important, and especially the zoning map, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Whitten, I understand that you will be at the joint meeting between the planning board and the select board on January 17th, am I correct?
Yes, ma'am. I won't be there in person, but I will be there via Zoom, yes.
Right, well, I'm hoping that we can continue this conversation and at that time, because I think that it's one that's really important, and I think you have much to offer us. So I'm going to be thinking about what you've said, and I thank you for attending. Did you have one question?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. We do have a little bit of a time constraint.
I understand.
Apologies to
I think I'm probably clear on this, but any more detail would be much appreciated. What do you need from the planning board to put pen to paper on this in terms of detail? Because we have gotten the map, preliminary map, dividing the campus into 3 sections. And I'm just wondering, what level of detail do you need within those sections, or with uses, or square footage, or just help me with that?
Sure. So another great question. So the overlay district, if this happens, the overlay district is going to allow uses by right and uses by special permit. The district does not have to say what is prohibited because that which is not included is deemed prohibited. So I would, in a perfect world, I would ask the planning board and the public, what is it that you want to happen on this parcel over the next 20 years, 50 years in a perfect world? What is it that would be tolerable, kind of worst case, but what is it that would be exciting, that would be transformative, that would be the best neighbor, that would be the best revenue generator in keeping with the environmental and the planning concerns of the town? What do you want to see happen? And for some folks, it's easier to phrase it, what don't you want to see happen here? I prefer the conversation to be more positive, but sometimes it's easier to say, well, we don't want anything commercial. We don't want anything industrial. We don't want an Amazon warehouse here. We don't want a retail marijuana store. We don't want this. We don't want that. Sometimes doing that exercise is a little bit easier. It's almost easier to say what you don't want. And that's what I think the planning board needs to give back to me so I can give you that in writing as part of an overlay or as part of a proposal. In terms of dimension and control, that would be really helpful, but I would start on the macro level. What are the land uses? And then we can work on what are the dimensions or density, because that almost becomes a little bit easier. And that also ties into carrying capacity issues, water, wastewater, traffic. So we don't want the tail wagging the dog here. We really need to know whether we have capacity to deal with, let's say somebody proposed an Amazon warehouse, something crazy like that. Well, do we have the capacity to have kind of a 100,000 square foot warehouse with X thousand vehicle trips per day? So in a way, when you're thinking about what it is you do want or don't want, part of it is constraints, whether it's water, wastewater, traffic, even issues like the public school, which of course would never be on the table if it came down to a special permit. But that's something you can think about in this context, because we don't have an application before us. So whether it's the public school or public safety demands, we could think about uses that are more supportive of those facilities than take away. So long-winded answer, I say to come up with the things we would want this parcel to be developed at or with, assuming that it's not going to remain a college for much longer.
Thank you very much. That's exactly what we hope to do tonight. So I think we'll see you in a week.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the board. Very nice to meet you, albeit informally, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, I'm going to entertain a motion owing to the pending litigation to enter executive session.
I move to,
Marnie, before you make the motion, you just need to make the declaration as chair that you're going into executive session pursuant to General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, discuss strategy with respect to litigation. Because in open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the board relative to the two Chewbacca appeals, one in the land court, docket number 22 MISC 00591, one in the Superior Court, case number 2277 CV 01137. But before the motion, you need to make the chair's declaration.
May I adopt what you just said?
I think that's fine.
Thank you very much. That's what we're going to be doing. So we're going into executive session pursuant to Mass General Laws 30A, Section 2, subsection A3. So, Town Council has provided us with the level of detail that's required. So thank you. So I will entertain the motion. You so moved, Richard, I believe?
no, I would never so move. I was going to repeat it, but since
You're
it's
not
so
gonna repeat it.
determined, but since it's so long, I so move.
Thank you very much. Do I have a second?
A second.
Okay, so I'll do a roll call vote. Jonathan Poor,
Aye.
Bill Wheaton, now that you're present,
I abstain.
Emil Dahlquist,
Aye.
Beth Herr,
Aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
Richard Boroff,
Aye.
and Marty Crouch. Aye. So at
And
this, juncture, we
And-
are in executive session.
Marty, just so anyone watching knows, you're returning to the open session by 7:15, correct?
I will endeavor to do that, and if we are running into your hard stop, just please advise us, and we will accommodate you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to close the door since we're going to do
Go.
executive session.
Just go.